Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome everyone here this morning. As far as announcements, I have one announcement, and it's kind of sad. Marvin Jacobs, who was the preacher at the West Avenue Church of Christ in Ashtabula, passed away within the last couple of days. He passed away at the age of 89, and we're all sorry to hear that, and our prayers go out to the family and just so many friends that he had. As you all know, Terry and Jeannie are out west on sabbatical, and they've been asked to lead the funeral services for Marvin, so we want to keep them in our prayers. And as you know, we're doing a 4-part series on gratitude, and even in the midst of grief, you can find gratitude. You could be grateful to the Lord that He brought Marvin into your lives and that he became a part of your life, and you'll always hold him close and dear to your heart and your memories. As you can see, I'm presenting this morning's lesson from the building, and I'm doing that for a reason. That reason is I really felt compelled to do this because I feel this lesson's important enough that I just can't do it sitting at home. I have to stand up to do this lesson. So bear with me. And I will let you in on something. Before I turn this video on, I even sat down and sang a few of our church songs. And don't worry, I'm not going to do it on live video. I don't want to chase everybody away. I want to bring you in. So the title of today's sermon is Gratitude's Enemy, Grumbling and Murmuring. I can think of nothing that needs attention more in our society today than a lesson on grumbling and murmuring. And not only in our society, but in the church as well. We must keep the biblical concept of gratitude alive and active. Not let grumbling and murmuring seep into our thoughts and our actions. If you haven't seen our first lesson on gratitude, I encourage you to go to our website or look it up here on our site on Facebook and check that out. In this second of 4 lessons on gratitude, our first lesson was on the basics of gratitude, which led into this, gratitude's enemy, something we have to watch out for, grumbling and murmuring. We learned in our last lesson that Noah's first act after stepping off the ark was to build an altar to God, to give thanks to God. To show gratitude to God was the first thing he did after spending a year on an enclosed ship with animals and just all kinds of stuff going on. Just think of that. For the entire year, he was locked up in an ark in close proximity to all these animals and even close to his family. He never grumbled. He never complained. I wonder how we would have held up under that kind of situation. We'll begin this lesson by stating our main point right from the go. Grumbling and complaining undermine the grace of God and can poison the church and can even poison our hearts. So let's focus on gratitude and not on the things we don't have, or always being concerned about having things go our way. We need to let some things just go. There's a movie series from the 90s. It's about 2 men. We're going to give you a few clues to help you recognize what movie we're talking about. Complaining, negativity, intolerance, uncompromising, griping, fussing, and one more that should give it away, grumpiness. That's right. It's grumpy old men, and the second one was grumpier old men. Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon got away with attitudes and behaviors done in a way that made us laugh. However, if we are to practice their words and actions in real life, we would be far from funny. Because in real life, no one wants to spend time with a complainer, a grumbler, a grumpy old man, a grumpy old woman, or for that matter, a grumpy young man and a grumpy young woman. Studies have shown that few things are more detrimental to our health than a bad attitude, because our attitudes begin with our mindset. If our perspective is stuck in a muck of negativity, our body, our behaviors, our mental, emotional, even physical health will begin to take on this posture, a posture of negativity. The opposite of gratitude is ingratitude. Webster defines ingratitude this way: the failure or refusal to acknowledge receipt of something good from another, the forgetfulness of or poor return of kindness. Have you ever had someone that you helped out or did something good for, and they, rather than thank you, act like you had to do it? They deserved it, or it was your job to do it, so therefore no thanks is necessary. You could see that negative attitude in people. Ingratitude is a choice not to recognize good or kindness in our life or the life of others. It is a choice to take on the mindset and the spirit of the grumpy old men. The Bible is full of stories originating from a heart of intolerance. All of us know the story of Cain killing his brother Abel. Both brothers offered the sacrifice to God. Abel's sacrifice was acceptable, Cain's was not. Knowing Cain's sacrifice was given from an ungrateful heart, God rejected that offering. Cain's ungrateful spirit sparked a wave of brewing anger within him, which convinced Cain that the answer to his wounded pride was not a reflection of his ungrateful sacrifice, but instead led to the murder of his brother. David is another example. David lived a life that most of us only dream of. He lived a blessed life. The Lord gave him a kingdom, a successful career as a king, a wife who loved him, all of the provisions he would ever need, ever hope to need, plus more. However, the moment his gaze shifted from the goodness and mercies in his life, and instead his heart followed his eyes to a nearby rooftop, David coveted what he didn't have. And in his heart, he became ungrateful. And his ungrateful heart led to sin. And that sin, adultery and manslaughter. His life was scarred by this sin. All because his focus shifted from the Lord's grace in his life, forgetting all for which he had to be grateful for. Ingratitude will cause us to slide down that slippery slope to a life of sin. Excuse me. Philosopher Dave Hume wrote this: of all the crimes that human creatures are capable of committing, the most horrid and unnatural is ingratitude. Another put it this way: gratitude is a trait proven to be much more than an attitude, but the embodiment of expression, of value, and an emotional and spiritual connection. It's a challenge to package gratitude into a simple concept, thus our four-part series. However, gratitude's opposite, although easy to spot, can creep up on us in subtle ways and is often masked by our emotions, our thoughts, and our behaviors, making the spirit of ungratefulness a challenge to identify. It is a sin that can drive a costly price, as we've seen in David and Cain. Let's take a look at Israel's attitude soon after leaving Egypt. Exodus chapter 16, in the interest of time this morning, I ask that you take the time later to read the full chapter of 16 to really get a grasp of what's being said there. Okay, if you do take the time to read our scripture references, you'll gain a better and deeper understanding of this lesson and the lessons to come. We learn from the text that after approximately 45 days of the travel from Egypt, their resources began to run low. Their hunger and exhaustion began to kick in. Their excitement from leaving their enemies and while learning how to be free all at the same time was beginning to be replaced by their hunger. We could say, as their bellies began to rumble, their mouths began to grumble. Exodus 16:2. And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. Exodus 16:3. 16:3. And the sons of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger. Just as we sometimes struggle with our needs, so did Israel. It's nothing new. We read that they were overcome by their fear of hunger. Israel's focus shifted from the Lord's provisions to what Egypt could supply. Their grumbling caused them to believe that Egypt could better care for them than the Lord. In Exodus 16, moving on to verses 4 through 8, then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether or not they walk with my instruction. And it will come about on the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much that they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to the sons of Israel, and this is important, at evening you will know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your grumblings against the Lord. And what are we that you grumble against us? So the Lord, being gentle with these people fresh from their captivity, heard their grumble, and through his grace provided for them. He sent quail from the sky and manna from the ground. We read that Moses takes this moment to teach the people about their toxic attitude. To paraphrase what Moses said, hey, this attitude, this complaining amongst yourselves, this underlying murmuring is not against us, Aaron and myself. Your words are against the Lord. Is this who we are? Are we a people that would grumble against the Lord's provisions? Let's not be quick to judge them, though. This attitude of grumbling was not and is not unique to Israel or to those who fled Egypt. We read in the New Testament in a letter from James, chapter 1, verses 1 and 4. James, chapter 1. That James understood this concept that Moses was teaching the people way back when, that he understood this quite well. When he surveyed his congregation, he found that his body of believers were adopting different postures that could lead them into sin. James urged them, as Moses did, to guard themselves. James tells his fellow Christ followers, many of whom were also new to the faith, that even in the most significant trials, to remain strong with an attitude of Christ. Because they don't, they will be overtaken with sin. So let's read James 1:12 through 15. Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial. For once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death, and that is spiritual death. To break these few first verses down so that we can more fully understand them and what's being said here, desires that tempt us to place faith in anything or anyone other than God have the potential to lead us astray and lead us into sin. And to be directed away from the Lord's grace is to be directed into darkness, which is spiritual death. Let's come back to Israel in the desert. So what I want you to do is take the time to read Numbers 11, verses 1 through 15. Numbers 11, 1 through 15, when you have the opportunity. Now this is set approximately 2 years after their first grumblings, when the Lord provided the manna and the quail. They were never without food, although they were living deep in the desert. The Israelites accepted the food of the Lord graciously. And again, they began to complain and grumble. Our text in Numbers says that the Lord burned with anger, and he demonstrated his anger by burning the outskirts of the camp. The Lord is not pleased with grumbling. Moses twice mentions that the people of the Exodus were grumbling. I'm sure there were a lot more that Moses could have recorded, but he emphasized grumbling twice for a reason. The Israelites thought they were justified in their grumbling. Sound familiar? They thought they were justified in their grumbling. But Moses recognized that this would be a cancer that would end up destroying the people and the new nation. And Moses understood that grumbling had the potential to destroy God's people in the future as well. These words were given for our reproof. Why? Because Moses knows, as we read in James, that an attitude of ingratitude leads to sin that eventually pulls us far away from the Lord, whom we no longer trust. All of us know some who have grumbled themselves right out of the church after being filled with an attitude of ingratitude. We need to guard against that. Therefore, what is grumbling? Why is complaining so detrimental to our faith? To grumble and complain is to reject the grace of God. To grumble and complain is to reject the grace of God. Israel's grumbling grew to be greater than their perceived needs. Their murmuring was a faithless act that displeased God in his provisions. They were saying that God's provisions weren't enough. They chose to be ungrateful for God's daily supply, and their grumbling grew to where they were saying that to return to slavery in Egypt would be better. They were about to reject the grace of God. Grumbling takes the form of sin and leads to discomfort, fussiness, gossip, negativity, intolerance, impatience. It's uncompromising and unyielding mindset and behavior just starts to permeate within us. We all know this is true. We have seen it spring forth in others, and we may have seen it spring forth in our own lives as well. Grumbling has the power to sneak up and destroy the strongest of believers. Why do we find it so easy and self-gratifying to grumble? In essence, grumbling gives us a pass to shift our focus from faith in God's provisions to the problems and concerns in our lives. This always leads to the eating away of our recognition of God's grace in our lives. Grumbling has the power to bring us to a place we should not want to be, a place of ingratitude for God's grace. To live without gratitude and choose to grumble is to live life backwards. Our lives under God's grace will be eroded. Our lives will be eroded by ingratitude. Remember that even the hardest rock can be worn away by the constant slapping of the waves against them. Never think that you're strong and above grumbling. Always be on guard. It seems so easy to slip into grumbling, doesn't it? In bringing this lesson to a close, wrapping this up, each of us need to closely examine our thoughts, our attitudes, and our words, and our actions. Ask ourselves, where do I grumble? Am I a complaining lot? Do I look at my life and say, this ain't enough? Am I living of a state of I wish, I want, I had, I miss? Do I look at others' lives lovingly and wish I had their experience, their possessions, their house, their job, their family, their friends? These questions are designed to bring to our attention how grumbling and murmuring can sneak up on us without even recognizing it. They express an attitude of ingratitude. A grumbling heart is directly opposite of a grateful heart. A grumbling heart is opposite of a grateful heart. Thankfully, grumbling does not have to be the final say. God's grace surpasses grumbling. God is gracious to forgive. And the answer to our ingratitude doesn't require a big push, a big effort. You can begin to push the needle forward and start practicing gratitude right now. You know, as I mentioned in the beginning, that Marvin Jacobs had passed away. And in the middle of those who loved him, in the middle of their grief, they can find gratitude. Not gratitude that Marvin has passed on, but gratitude that God had brought Marvin into their lives and that he became a part of their lives, that he enriched their lives. They can be grateful for that as they grieve. So let's ask ourselves, how can I move the needle forward in my life right now, this week, not next month, not next year, now? Make a conscious effort to practice gratitude. Check yourself. Hold yourself in check when you're about to outburst with something. It's not hard at all. Just take that first step. If you find trouble with your attitude, take it to the Lord in prayer. If you feel stuck with a grumbling spirit, or you find yourself leaning more towards ingratitude most days rather than God's gratitude, look to the beauty of the gospel for your answers. Look in these pages. God gave these pages to us. The gospel is a proclamation of God's grace. God, through Jesus the Christ, offers you a freedom based on grace, free from grumbling and ingratitude and all those bitter attitudes. You can cast them off. The good news, God freely offers his grace to us. If you have already accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, pray often for an attitude of gratitude. If you as yet haven't given your life over to him, won't you now consider doing so? Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father but by me. I look at that as Jesus saying, I am the way that leads to truth, that gives life, and that life he gives is eternal. Talk about something to have gratitude about. In both your darkest and brightest moments, think on these things, and you will discover the gratitude of God's grace springing forward, springing out of you from deep inside. You will discover a new you with an attitude of gratitude. You will feel that ingratitude burden lifted right off of you. Thank everyone. I want to thank everyone for your kind attention. And in 2 weeks, we'll present the third part of this sermon series on gratitude, and it's titled, Gratitude, What Unites Us. Thank you, and have a good day.